Yay! All right, it looks like our time has come to hear a little bit of history. I'm loving it that everybody's enjoying seeing each other and on this beautiful day. Some of you haven't seen each other in a while, so that's always wonderful. Right now what we're doing is we're getting other speakers are coming up. So as soon as everybody can settle in, get a chair, get your food, I'm going to start. In the magic box, the cheat sheet. Just a couple of announcements just to say, Hartland Historical Society members, etc., who know Mandy Nurge know that she lost her husband just a short while back. We do have a card up here if you would like to sign it. We're sending it from Hartland Historical Society. So, Lynn, if you get it back up to the table whenever you have a chance. Also, love it if you folks would sign in, so we do have that stated as those have visited us today. So, I welcome and thank you for joining us today at our Hartland Historical Society annual Blueberry Picnic, celebrating the opening of the museum 28 years ago. I am Joanne Groth, President Curator to the Hartland Historical Society. I'm saying that because we do have the Granby Public TV here today taping us. Yay, thank you very much. Our program today is to tell you about one of Hartland's early settlers' migration to the Connecticut Western Reserve of Ohio in the 1800s. Hartland's first permanent pioneer settler came in 1754. The Bushnell family we will tell you about today came in 1770. They were prominent residents and they stayed in Hartland for 33 years. We will end today with two blueberry stories, one being a brand new one from Jack Rourke. And then we will have serving a dessert and the house will be open for viewing. So please visit the museum too. First, what was the Connecticut Western Reserve? What follows is a brief description. Please join us at our fall meeting on October 1st when our state historian, Walt Woodard, will be presenting Leaving Connecticut, Shaping America with a more inclusive description. The Connecticut Western Reserve was a portion of land claimed by the colony of Connecticut and later by the state of Connecticut in what is now mostly northeastern region of Ohio. The reserve had been granted to the Connecticut colony by King Charles II in 1662. Connecticut relinquished claim to some of this land in 1786 following the American Revolutionary War in exchange for federal assumption of its debt. Connecticut retained 3,366,921 acres in Ohio, which was originally named New Connecticut, later discarded in favor of Western Reserve. The state of Connecticut sold the Western Reserve land to the Connecticut Land Company. This is the interesting part. By 35 quitclaim deeds in 1795 for $1,200,000. The Land Company were a group of investors who were mostly from Suffield, Connecticut. There were initially 8 in the group, and they planned to divide the land and sell it to settlers from the east, particularly younger men from New England. In 1796, the Land Company sent surveyors led by Moses Cleveland, hence Cleveland, Ohio, to the reserve to divide the land into square townships. They were 5 miles each side. Hartland's Titus Hayes was one of these surveyors and also moved there. In 1798, the company divided this land into shares called drafts, which were drawn by members at the company's office in Hartford. Hartland's Uriah Holmes became a Connecticut land agent. Here is a story. Edward Brockway, originally from Branford, Connecticut, married Hannah Palmer of Hartland in 1777. Along with the building his house that stands today as the home of June Shue. So if those who know June, this was Edward Brockway's home. Ed had 20 children with 4 wives. Hearing the wonders of New Connecticut or Western Reserve, and thinking also of his large family of sons and daughters, and trying to solve the problem of how to provide homes for all, he sold his property and took up line of march to the then far west. Brockway was the first deed of Uriah Holmes, made in 1799, conveying 3,194 acres of land for a consideration of $500. This was being less than 16 cents an acre in Hartford, Trumbull County, Ohio. Note this, the name Hartford was taken from our city of Hartford, and Trumbull came from our Connecticut governor at the time. Now Edward Brockway, Isaac Jones, and Ashel Bernard, all from Hartland, were the first there, and after building a cabin and sowing a field of wheat, returned to the east and brought out their families in the summer of 1800. This is a description of their cabin. A log house was quickly made ready, having neither doors, windows, nor floor. Blankets served for a door, sticks plastered with mud for a chimney, and the earth tramped hard for a floor. Later, a puncheon floor, which is board split out of a log, was provided, also doors and windows. Our Ed Brockway from Hartland is known to have been the first settler there and the first one to cut a tree in Trumbull County, Hartford. Connecticut then ceded sovereignty over the Western Reserve in 1800. The United States absorbed it into the Northwest Territory. Today, the name Western Reserve survives in various institutions such as Western Reserve University, Western Reserve Historical Society, and the case Western Reserve University. What followed? In 1803, Alexander and Chloe Bushnell were respectively 64 and 65 years old and had lived on the East Mountain of Hartland for 33 years. Why did they and their 10 children decide to migrate to the wilderness of the Connecticut Reserve, a land they had never seen and was not developed? Here are some thoughts and research of Bushnell descendant Louis W. Bushnell. The hard life in Hartland, Connecticut. Both Alexander and his son Daniel were carpenters and had built their own houses. However, since the population was not large enough or affluent enough to support independent trades, everybody had to farm to provide the necessities of life. Large families on small farms had always had a hard life in Hartland. The ground was hilly, uneven, and covered with rocks. Ha, we know that. According to Paul Crendon, land yields were low and taxes were high. Land was hard to find and expensive to buy. By the end of the 18th century, many were disillusioned and discouraged here in Hartland. Number 2, the new church building and the new tax. The Bushnell family had a long history of religious commitment. Alexander had served as a deacon of the First Church Congregational. In 1800, Daniel, his son, was contracted to build the new meeting house, which is the First Church Congregational building which stands today. When it was complete, the clergy and some of its members, with the help of some prominent citizens, levied a 15% property tax on every church member to be paid within 2 years. Connecticut historian Chris Klingemeyer believes this action contributed significantly to the large migration to the Connecticut Western Reserve in the early 1800s. 3, the Bushnells, Uriah Holmes, and the Connecticut Land Company relationship. Uriah Holmes was a prominent citizen of Hartland in the late 1700s. A colonel in the Revolutionary War and a benefactor of the Congregational Church, Uriah served both as Hartland town clerk and representative to the Connecticut General Court. He was a selectman along with Alexander Bushnell in 1793. Being a land speculator, he owned a lot of Hartland property and was one of the 48 citizens associated with the Connecticut Land Company. Just a note, Uriah built part of what we know today as the Coach Stop restaurant. Just a note of interest, the Taylor family of the West Mountain also went to Ohio. And Lester Taylor's writings about living in Hartland were published in our Spring Chronicler newsletter, with the second part about Ohio coming out this fall. The Taylor family started migrating in 1811, after being in Hartland nearly 60 years, with all of their family members in Clarendon, Ohio by 1830. I'm pleased to say we had a visit from Bill Hyde, a descendant of Mary Wilder from our town, wife of Lester, who provided us with this Lester Taylor story. Bill grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. He is a member of the Clarendon, Ohio Church, and he commented that 27 out of the 31 first chartered members were from Hartland, Connecticut. Hartland names that I know at this time that I have found in the files that went to Ohio: Andrews, Banning, Bates, Beach, Beeman, Blakesley, Borden, Brockway, Bushnell, Childs, Clemens, Cone, Cornish, who owned this house, now our museum, Douglas, Eddy, Fuller, French, Gaylord, Giddings, Gildersleeve, Hayes, Hotchkiss, Jones, Kellogg, Mitchum, Moore, Moses, Newell, Rice, Taylor, Treat, Tuttle, Wilden, Wright, and I think it continues on with more. So now that you have a sense of what the Connecticut Western Reserve was and some reasons why our residents left to start a new adventure, let's hear a little bit about one family and who they were and what happened to them. Keep in mind, this piece is all about the Hartland Bushnell family, Alexander and Chloe, and their 10 children. We have provided you with a family tree to help you to follow, and if interested, there is a map up here that I tried to locate where their homes were located on the east side. I will now have Cece Kendrick, our Vice President, to come up, and she will begin the story of the Bushnells.
Okay, so the Bushnell family moved to Ohio. Picture yourselves 200 years ago. What did you do for entertainment on a Friday night or Sunday afternoon? Certainly you would not have gathered to watch the latest ball game on your TV, nor would you have played the latest games on your laptops, cell phones, or gaming systems. In fact, you may have written letters to loved ones far away, while wondering if you would ever see them again. In the olden days, children would sometimes marry and move away from their families forever, as those fans of Laura Ingalls Wilder know when Laura and Almanzo moved to Missouri. Imagine not knowing if you would ever see your children or parents again. Now, this may have been another motivating factor to cause a large family exodus from Hartland. Wagon trains west, oh yes, and what a road trip it was. Denison University history professor William Utter wrote, quote, "If the visitor to Ohio in 1803 could, by some trick of time, have viewed the state from the air, he would have seen a forest so dense that he would have believed it impenetrable. No roadside rest areas," end quote. That was no roadside rest areas, motels, McDonald's Happy Meals, or even gas station convenience stores. This was not a leisurely road trip. Well, to begin with, Captain Alexander Bushnell traded his Hartland home for land in Vernon, Ohio. You can follow him on the family tree here. This home, destroyed by fire in 1925, stood for some 127 years and had been built in 1798 by his son Daniel, the same one who built the first church still standing in East Hartland today. They left Hartland with 8 to 10 other families. How exciting! So they gave up their home and commenced on a luxurious travel vacation through the wilderness and muddy, rutted roads between Connecticut and Ohio. Their journey was only 555 miles. but it took them 42 days. Wow, that would be like walking. Well, why did it take so long? Well, the modern vehicles of the day were actually wagons and ox carts. Oxen teams, with their monstrous power, could travel only about 1 to 2 miles per hour, or about 20 miles per day, and that was on level ground. When they reached Appalachia, with the steep mountain slopes, those rugged and tough oxen traveled about 3 to 4 miles per day. Well, don't be so hard on them. They carried all the worldly belongings of their families. In fact, they also carried the women and young children. The men and lucky older boys got to walk alongside their wagons. They must have looked forward to rest stops. Although they didn't need gas stations, their oxen needed to sleep, water, and graze. Oh boy, and sometimes the families needed to mend wagons and remount wheels and, I suppose, mend some sprained ankles and other maladies of the road. While stopped, there were many chores to do. Wild game was hunted at the river and lake roadside convenience areas, providing dinner for all, hopefully. No free coffee on holiday weekends. Some food was gathered, perhaps blueberries, while fished and hunted food was cleaned, prepared, and cooked on open fires, and of course, fuel had to be gathered from the forests. Water jugs were refilled for the next leg of the journey. If the travelers were then camping for their night, the stores of food and supplies must be protected from wild animals, scavenging for a free meal. This may have involved stringing up food nets and tree branches to keep the bears away. The settlers often slept in their wagons as room allowed, or on the ground, possibly underneath the wagons, for some rain shelter. If time permitted, some simple shelters of tree branches with ropes may have been constructed for their comfort and convenience. So now, before you all sign up for such a getaway, keep in mind that everyone had to do his or her share. Already mentioned were the animal care, the fire tending, the hunting and gathering, food preparation, the water collection, and medical needs. But don't forget the repacking every morning, the navigation of the wagon train itself, the digging of the latrine, child care, child discipline. Quit wrestling in the back of the wagon. Do you know how far it is to the nearest hospital? The mending, the dishwashing, and laundering. Oh my, this vacation is busy. But what about the necessary chore we haven't mentioned yet? Ideas? Watch out for Indians! Someone had to take this duty at all times. I'm sure it is easier on the latest video game. Sarcasm and humor aside, anyone want to sign up for this next extravagant road trip? Don't see any volunteers. Well, all the Hartland Bushnells made it to Ohio. Here is what we know of the Bushnell family since relocation to Ohio. Alexander, Captain Alexander, lived there for about 14 years before his death in 1818 at the age of 79. Chloe, his wife, died at the ripe old age of 94 in 1832. She had been the oldest person in the county for nearly 30 years. And now Lynn Osborne will tell you about Alexander and Chloe's first child, Thomas, and Thomas's two sons, Andrews and Eli. And here's Lynn.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to get started with Thomas. Thomas was born in 1762 and lived until 1817. He married Rebecca Andrews of Hartland and immigrated to Ohio in 1804 with a family of 10 children. He died of fever in 1817, surviving just long enough to endure the hardships of pioneer life. His sons of note are General Andrews Bushnell, 1782 to 1851, immigrated from Hartland with new wife Sarah Lane of Hartland. He was a farmer, a cattle breeder, a surveyor, sheriff, brigadier general of a militia, and a member of both the Congregational Church as well as the Whig Party, later called the Liberty Party, as supporters of the American Revolution. Andrew's son David, E., born 1811, died 1840, was a great student and traveled abroad throughout Europe and also to Egypt and Abyssinia. Supposedly, he had a guide to take him to Palestine and Jerusalem in 1840. The guide returned without him, saying he had gone on alone. But he was never heard from again. Speculation includes that the guide may have killed him for his money. Eli Bushnell, 1806 to 1862, the youngest son of Thomas, married Electa Jones, daughter of Elam Jones of Hartland, also a pioneer to Ohio. Eli was a skilled mechanic and developed, I got the wrong page, sorry. All right. Why can't I find it? This way? Yes, okay, sorry. Eli was a skilled mechanic and developed an axe factory in which he manufactured tools of all kinds, from anvils to vices to screw plates and trip hammers. He went out of business when his factory burned in 1859, but remained an honest and conscientious man, helping with charities and acting as a deacon for the Congregational Church. He also was a member of the Liberty Party of Whigs, being one of the first 12 voters of that town in his township. One of the first 12 voters of that party in his township. Okay, now it's Megan Lindgren will now tell you about Alexander and Chloe's second child, Daniel.
Daniel, 1763 to 1842, first married Rebecca Banning of Hartland, 1786, and later Eunice Brockway of Connecticut in 1810. He enlisted the Continental Army at age 16. He was an accomplished carpenter and contracted to build the second meeting house, First Church, standing today in 1800. Its stone step was inscribed, Mr. Daniel Bushnell, raised June 30th, A.D. 1801, is now inside the Gaylord House Museum. He emigrated from Hartland in 1803 with his wife and 8 children. He was active in building the Congregational Church and other local buildings in Hartford, Ohio. He was a lifelong member of the Masonic fraternity and raised a total of 17 children. His son of note is Dr. George Willis Bushnell, 1800 to 1892. He was 3 when he moved to Ohio. He married Sally Bates in 1824 and endured the hardships of pioneer life. He eagerly learned anything necessary to be learned, including farming, carpentry, shoemaking, and botanical practices for caring for his own family's medical needs. He acquired a reputation as a doctor for friends and neighbors as well. He spent over 50 years in the field of medical reform and was conferred with an honorary degree of Doctor of Medicine by the Physio-Medical Institute of Cincinnati. His medical advice and personal practice included no coffee or tea, no tobacco, no intoxicating drinks, be temperate in all things, and follow the proper use of things and the total abstinence from things naturally hurtful. Dr. George was also in the first organization of the Church of the Disciples of Christ in Ohio and was chosen overseer of the church. He became a traveling evangelist teacher for the church, but then withdrew from the church in 1847 due to his opposition of slavery. 6 years later, in 1853, the church passed a resolution against slavery, and George was reunited with the church, serving again as the overseer until he was 81 years old. Now Cece will take over and tell you about Alexander and Chloe's third child, William, and fourth child Chloe, and fifth child Alexander Jr.
Thank you, Megan. So Colonel William Bushnell, 1766 to 1849, married Mary Borden of Hartland and later Candace Adams of Ohio. He was the first Bushnell to emigrate from Hartland, and he was the first settler in the south part of Hartford, Ohio in 1801. His deed was dated December 31st, 1800. He traveled with a family of 8 children to Thompson Hill in Hartford, Ohio. The family story tells that William felled a large chestnut tree. Upon arrival, he put one end on the ground and the other against the base of the tree, and here they camped for 9 days in the pouring rain. Their child, William Jr., was born the next year, distinctively as the first white male child born in the township. Colonel William became the captain of the first military company in the county and also served in many county offices. Sadly, he lost his wife, 5 children, 2 grandchildren, and a daughter-in-law to typhoid fever in 1828. Now, this is Captain Alexander and Chloe's 4th child, another Chloe Bushnell, 1768 to 1838, married Obadiah Gildersleeve of a Hartland. And he later changed to Gilder when they moved to Ohio. 50 souls were in the company on their journey in 1804 to Gustavus, Ohio. A story. When there, the women of Gustavus traveled to Kinsman, where missionaries visited, to go to church. There was no fire in churches then, so those who could afford took little foot stoves of tin, having an iron cup filled with glowing coals from home. Long years after, when a stove was brought into church, the innovation was thought profane. You can see this type of foot stove in the living room of the museum here at Gaylord House. Number 5 child, Alexander Bushnell Jr., 1771 to 1838, was the first child of Alexander and Chloe that was born in Hartland, married Sarah Wells of New York, and he settled with his own family close to Ohio, but in Pittsburgh. And now Lynn will come back up to tell you about Alexander and Chloe's 6th child, Sterling, also written as Starling in land deeds, and Sterling's distinguished son, William, whose photo is on display, and William's son, Martin. Here you go.
Thank you, Cece. Sterling Graves Bushnell, 1772 to 1846, was named after Hartland minister Sterling Graves. He married Huldah Holcomb of Granby. Now that's a mouthful, Huldah Holcomb. And they immigrated in 1805 to Vernon, Ohio, and in 1820 removed to Vermilion Township. Sterling was also a man of many talents. He was a farmer, a tanner, a school teacher, a country attorney, justice of the peace, and land surveyor. A photo of his pipe-smoking wife, Huldah, is displayed on the Bushnell family tree upstairs inside the Gaylord House. So before you leave today, make sure you go into the Historical Society house and look her up. She was a tough woman, as evidenced by being stranded on Hudson Bay ice while Sterling led their team to safety. She reached solid ground after the ice broke and carried her some distance downshore. Mind you, 2 hours after their arrival in Trumbull County in Ohio, Huldah gave birth. How would you like that, ladies? So much for being born in a traffic jam in New York City. His son, Sterling Graves Bushnell's son of note, is William, 1800 to 1893. He immigrated to Ohio at a young age, and being able-bodied, he had to walk all the way. Lucky him. They had to construct a log raft to cross the Hudson River and waited for Lake Erie to freeze over in Buffalo. So they could replace the wagon wheels with runners to cross the lake. Wow, I'm glad I wasn't on that trip. William taught school and also studied medicine at the Ohio Medical College in Cincinnati. Many of his early patients were Indians, and in caring for them, he had to ride miles through the uncharted forests. He followed blazed trails through the woods which had been made by the friendly Indians. He set up practice of medicine in Mansfield, Ohio in 1828. He married Mary Bentley in 1836, the only daughter of General Robert Bentley, a prominent resident. William, in addition to a long and successful medical career, also served as the director of the Atlantic and Great Western Railway, a member of the Ohio House of Representatives, a member of the American Medical Association, a delegate from Ohio to the International Congress on Prison Reform in Stockholm, Sweden, as well as other civic roles. While at the International Congress, Dr. Bushnell successfully treated the Queen of Sweden herself after her own doctors had been unsuccessful. William had been back to visit Connecticut and fell in love with the beautiful white portico houses, so much so that he built a similar one in Mansfield, Ohio. He had this house reproduced in miniature on granite for the family grave marker in Mansfield, Ohio Cemetery. In 1876, Dr. Bushnell paid a visit to his old home in Hartland, and it was almost exactly as he remembered it over 7 years previously. The old couple who then lived in the house served Dr. Bushnell tea in the very room where he was born. William's son of note is Martin, 1837 to 1923. He became the president of the Richland County Historical Society, as well as a life member of the Ohio State Archaeological Society. He was a trustee of the Columbus State Hospital, director of Mansfield City Schools, a member of the First Congregational Church, and a lifelong philanthropist. He and his brothers built a 27-room mansion in Mansfield where they lived with their families from 1893 to about 1948. The home was placed on the National Register of Historical Places in 1974 and is still the showplace of Mansfield, now being the Ohio Genealogical Society since 1987. Sketch can be seen in the Gaylord House Museum. And now Megan will come back to tell of the last 4 children, Alexander and Chloe, all being daughters.
Mary Bushnell, 1775 to 1831, married the Honorable Calvin Cohn of Hartland, pioneer in 1804 of Gustavus, Ohio. Calvin was state senator in Ohio from 1806 to 1809. Mary and Calvin moved to Hartford, Ohio in 1817. An early story tells us that Esquire Cohn found there was a need of a blacksmith, so he sent word to Jehiel Meacham in Hartland, Connecticut, that he would give him 50 acres of land if he would come to Gustavus. Land being worth $2 an acre at the very least, Mr. Meacham accepted the offer and made haste, leaving Hartland in 1805 with sleds drawn by oxen. They had only reached Canandaigua, New York, when his wife fell when mounting the sled and was fatally injured. Mr. Meacham and the youngest 2 children stayed with his wife 4 days, and after that the funeral. After, with a heavy heart, he came on horseback to Gustavus. Hannah Bushnell, 1777 to 1849, married Davis Fuller of Hartland, pioneer of Hartford, Ohio. Lucy, 1781 to 1860, married Aaron Brockway of Hartland, one of the first settlers in Vernon, Ohio. And Phoebe, 1784 to 1875, married Ashael Borden of Hartland and settled in Hartford, Ohio in 1804. She died at age 91, the last of this pioneering family to pass away. Back to Joanne.
Excellent. You've been wonderful sitting there so nicely and listening. Thank you, Megan, Lynn, and Cece, for helping us tell the story of just one family in Hartland. They started in Hartland and they went to Ohio and did great things. So here ends our summary of the Bushnell family and who came to Hartland as an early settler. They were prominent residents and they moved to Ohio to become part of the shaping of Ohio and the shaping of America. These are the early days. I hope you enjoyed it. We may now look at how we live and travel as not so bad when we're in a traffic jam. I'll think twice. Before we conclude our program, I want to tell you what you can see in the museum that is connected to Ohio. And then we're going to end with a blueberry story to, of course, honor today's celebration of the opening of the Gaylord House Museum. We also will have two blueberry stories, one from Sally Laubin, a Hayes descendant, and Jack Work has come in today and he has a new blueberry story we've never heard, so we're looking forward to that. On the second floor is our Ohio exhibit. Artifacts from Reverend Nathaniel Gaylord, who was the preacher at the West Hartland Congregational Church from 1782 to 1841, that was 59 years, and his descendants who moved to Ohio. Some of these artifacts went to Ohio from Hartland or happened in Ohio, and all made it back to Hartland's Historical Society Museum. First, Connor chair that Reverend Gaylord sat in and wrote sermons. A silhouette of Reverend Nathaniel Gaylord. Also, sermons that Reverend Gaylord wrote. Reverend Gaylord's descendants, Orvin Gaylord's children, Frances Emily, born in Hartland, and Edward Albert, born in Ohio, are predominantly the family members whose artifacts are displayed today. They both moved to Ohio in the 1860s. You will also see the Gaylord family 1830 Seraphim instrument and blanket chest that went from Hartland with Frances Emily. On the walls, you'll find three family trees. One, the Gaylord family, although they were not early pioneers to Ohio, but they followed after in the 1860s. The descendant, Edward Arthur Gaylord, lived in this house, now our Historical Society Museum. Two, the Bushnell family, who you've just heard about. And the third tree is the Gidding family. Thomas was our first permanent settler, followed by his brother Joshua, who was a Western land pioneer along with some of his children. Take some time and read notable stories. Also, check out comparison photos of what Cleveland, Ohio looked like in 1830s versus 1910. These were photos offered by the local bank. In a small display case, you will find this bottle. It's a medicine bottle from 1850. It was found in an Ohio outhouse pit 20 feet down. This bottle is embossed with the words A.B. Tiffany and West Hartland, Connecticut. We know that Mr. Tiffany did own a store and also had local women build doll parts that he sold in New York. In the center casing, you will find documents of Edward Albert's wife, Emma F. Melcher family, of German descent. German passports, certificates, greeting cards. Can anyone read German? You'll also find photos of Edward Albert Gaylord, his wife Emma, and daughter Frances. Poems from a known Cleveland poet, Edmund Vance Cook, who was close friends of Edward Albert. And also photos of the Gaylord family members in the 1800s. Then the small case against the far wall are documents from the Western Reserve University and other Cleveland public schools, which Frances, the daughter of Edward Albert and Emma, attended. So to end the program, first off, a round of applause to our great speakers here for Ohio and Bushnell. We are now going to have Sally Laubin come up, and actually, Jack, you could come up now too and sit in one of the chairs and when she's done. So Sally is going to give us our traditional blueberry story about William Hayes. Once we are done with the blueberry stories, then it's dessert time and enjoying yourself at the museum, and we're here till 4 o'clock or so please enjoy yourselves.
Oh. If anyone needs a chair, we have lots of chairs to the right of the musicians. They're red chairs. Please help yourselves.
First, Sally Laubin.
I'm going to read from a newspaper article of the Hartford Courant, July 28, 1906. And this is about my great-grandfather, William Lorenzo Hayes. The land where blueberries grow. Everybody there picks, and all Hartford eats them. If any resident of Hartford has a craving for blueberries which cannot be satisfied by the contents of his purse, he should remove to East Hartland, where he can satiate himself and spare his pocketbook. The blueberry usually grows in swampy ground, but in that land of rare delight, so prodigal is the nature of the luscious blueberry that it grows everywhere a bush can take root. Along the roads, in the fields, on rocky ledges, and in many a garden can be seen bushes blue with their burden. Also, the size of the plants there is larger than elsewhere. Many of them grow to 5 feet in height. The chief articles of diet of the mountaineers of that region throughout the summer are blueberries and cream, blueberry pie, and just blueberries. The thrifty natives not only supply their own appetites, but the desires of many a town less fortunately situated. Practically the whole supply of Hartford comes from East Hartland. This week, William L. Hayes, a veteran dealer in the produce of the place, brought in 175 bushels. This enormous amount supplies every grocer in town and the various restaurants which sell blueberry pies. Last night, Mr. Hayes brought in 68 bushels, and before noon today he expects to get rid of the entire load. The season for blueberries lasts from the end of June to the middle of September. When the season is backward, the berries which have grown in shady places are marketable until October 1st. Mr. Hayes stated last night that he would sell over 1,000 bushels in Hartford this summer. This year, the conditions for a large crop have been ideal. There has been plenty of rain, and the berries are flourishing. The whole population of East Hartland and the surrounding country is busy picking them. The manner in which they have spread is unaccountable to the fruit dealer who has been on the road from Hartford to East Hartland for 32 years. He has begun where there were no blueberries, and then the place was destitute of them, as is our city, grocers and iceboxes excepted. Several years ago, the berry began to be heard of there, and now is spreading rapidly, still in the same unaccountable manner. 2 years ago, Mr. Hayes brought to Hartford nearly 1,000 bushels. Last year was a poor one for the fruit, but this season he expects to break all records. 3 times each week he makes the trip with the wagon going the 22 miles. His arrival in East Hartland is a signal for a stampede in his direction of all the families, from grandfathers with 2-gallon pail to the baby who has eaten enough of the fruit to affect its gait, and who brings a couple of quarts. At the end of the season, there is a grand settling of accounts. Mr. Hayes has a grocery store in Hartland where he keeps the records of all blueberries brought in. If this record were lost, the whole town would go into bankruptcy. The price of blueberries in East Hartland is 8 cents a quart. Here, it is 10 cents a quart. And an addendum to this story is about my mother, Esther Hayes, who as a child had to pick those blue things for her grandfather. She didn't like this task, and therefore the blueberries at home, when her mother would serve blueberry pie, Esther, having some of her grandfather's entrepreneurship, would sell her piece of pie to her brothers in the Borders for 10 cents apiece. So, if you go over there to eat some blueberry pie from the booth, think of my mother and leave 10 cents.
Hello, I'm Jack Rourke. My story's not as famous as that, but when I was 9 years old, I lived at the Bates Farm, which my house is now, and I'd have a blueberry stand, like a lemonade stand, and we would pick the blueberry. We had low bush, we didn't have the high bush, and my grandmother would help me pick. I was 9 years old. And you know those older ladies, they always had an apron, and they gathered the corners, and everything went in that apron, and they would dump. But anyway, I had like 5 or 6 quarts of berries on this little stand sitting by the road. And that's 179 South Road. And when I was 9 years old, that would be 1949. You could count the cars that went by there all day on one hand and have fingers left over. There just was no traffic. So I would sit there like a little kid, and all of a sudden this guy pops up, all well dressed, hat on and everything. And he comes, I didn't know cars, it was a big car, and he buys my 6 quarts of blueberries. And I said, wow, all in one day, you know? So I run in and I tell my grandmother, look, I sold all my berries today. She says, well, we better pick again. So out we go, we pick another 6 quarts, plop them down there. The next day, here comes the same guy. And he says, those are the best berries we've ever had. They were clean, picked, no green, no leaves, no stems. He says, I'll tell you what. He says, I'm going to be coming through here about 4 o'clock tonight. I'd like a bushel of them. At 9 years old, not like her, I didn't know what a bushel was. You know? So I said, hell yeah. So I ran and I told my grandmother, we need a bushel of blueberries by 4 o'clock tonight. And she goes, bazooka, right? So then she puts on the phone and calls her. Where we lived there, they were all our neighbors, all cousins, relatives, and there was really no houses. I mean, I didn't know, Yubi's right there. Did they name the streets back then? Was Sunset, or I don't even know. But it was up there, and then where it branches off, it's Westwood now. The only house that was there was Clara Clark. The next house was Connie Gower, and the next house was Robertson's. There's nothing in between. Everybody had blueberries back then. They came from all over to pick blueberries. And then going the other way, there was Aggie Raby. She was a Williams. There was Florence Crowley was a Williams. Her mother. Anyway, there was 8 of them. In fact, I was going to bring my slideshow with you and make an imaginary thing so that I would say, here's a slide, and when I go like this, it's a slide. And then you got to kind of imagine these 8 people standing there. It was Aggie Raby, Florence Crowley, her mother, my grandmother, Clara Clark, Beatrice Clark, Leona Roberts, all standing there ready to pick berries that my grandmother had called because we had to have a bushel by that night. And the next slide is, here they all are bending over. Oh, I probably shouldn't show you that one. But anyway, we picked those a bushel of berries, and my grandmother made me pay them 15 cents a quart. And I was selling them for 40 cents a quart, so I was ready to do another bushel. Right? But that's really kind of the story that I never expected to do that again, because if you live around that time, there was nobody went down that road. And to have this guy pop up out of nowhere and buy all my berries and a whole bushel the next day was amazing. I want to ask Yubi something. Doc Emmons had a woodworking shop at the time, and my blueberry stand was made of boards that my grandfather had got from Doc Emmons. And I think, I don't know, there's people here who probably know this too. Doc Emmons, he made toothpicks, right?
What?
Toothpicks.
Clothespins.
Clothespins?
Clothespins.
Yeah. I never knew that.
Not toothpicks.
Clothespins, huh? So anyway, that's my blueberry story. It was a long time ago, and I think you'll be talking today. I think the cows kept everything down so that the bushes would get sunlight and grow, but this, I don't know if there's any around anywhere.
What happened to the blueberries? The blueberry fields grew up. The cows are gone. The cows
Yeah.
to keep the pastures and the fields down, and the cows are gone, and the bushes are here, and the berries are gone.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time.
Again, thank you very much for coming and enjoying our little history today and a new blueberry story. That was awesome. So we're now going to enjoy some music with Ed Baldwin and friends. Ed, you may want to mention their names when you're up there because I don't have the piece of paper you gave to me earlier. So, and again, please help yourself to dessert and enjoy the museum. We'll see you down the road.
Thank you.